trauma is complex. Trauma looks differently for everyone. It is not for us to label someone else's trauma. This is one of our newer lessons in the WHO program, but it is so important. In my opinion, it's one of the most important lessons we can have with our students and important conversations to have about trauma. This lesson is tough, very tough, but it's relevant. And I think that your students will really relate to some of the feelings that our characters are having. Trauma is one of the most strongest risk factors associated with mental health conditions. It's there, it's impacting our students. And again, it looks differently for everybody. For you as the facilitator, it is so important that you make sure you have on that trauma-informed hat. So apply all of that knowledge from those trainings that you've been to and what you know about trauma, and really make sure that you have that lens on when you're facilitating not just this lesson, but all of our lessons in the WHO curriculum, but especially this one, because we are talking about trauma. But it is so important to know that what a student has been through is going to impact who they are as a person. It's going to play a role in their thoughts, their behaviors, their feelings, all of that. So being able to understand and empathize with the trauma that they have experienced will be a vital piece in empowering them to be safe and think about ways to navigate safety. Again, this scenario is tough because we do use a scenario involving a school shooting. This has unfortunately been a common story that we see impacting many schools across our nation. Even if your school has not been impacted directly by a school shooting, your students have heard about it. Your students might have feelings about it. They might have similar feelings that characters have, or a similar situation that our characters have. But as more and more of our society becomes saturated with this information about what is happening in our schools, we cannot ignore the impact that that is having on our students and the feelings that they have, the emotions, the thoughts, all of those things, and potentially even behaviors that they're having. You could also relate this story a lot to some of the pandemic that we've been seeing. That's some trauma that we've been experiencing in our schools, especially. There's been a lot of conversation around that, and our students, our middle school students, they hear it, they know it's happening. So being able to have healthy conversations around that will be a really great tool for you and your students, I think. Some key objectives you can talk about in this lesson. What is trauma? Having your students navigate what trauma might be, what they define trauma as. Are there different kinds of trauma? Oftentimes we hear about physical trauma and how, definitely we can be physically traumatized by something, but we sometimes don't focus as much on the emotional trauma and the mental trauma that we can experience as a result of maybe some of that other trauma impacting our lives. So really spending some time talking about those different forms of trauma and how they might feel, what they might look like. And then, of course, has there ever been a time that your students felt similar to the characters in our scenario? We see a lot of emotions coming from them, some nervousness, some fear, some uncertainty. I think those are feelings that our students might relate to. So letting them know that it's okay to have those feelings. We give you a lot of great discussion questions that you can use to continue the conversation. But you can also have discussions about them like, okay, when something happens to us, how does that impact our mood, right? When something good happens, we might feel happy, energetic, excited. When something not so good happens, we might feel sad, angry, scared, frustrated, fill in the blank emotions. So it's a great opportunity for your students to label some of those emotions that maybe they haven't labeled before. Because what has happened to us will have a direct impact on how we are feeling and our overall mood. This might give you a great opportunity to talk with your students a little bit about some of those warning signs or triggers, because they sometimes can sense in themselves when something might be about to happen, right? If someone says this to me, I know it's going to make me angry and it might result in this behavior. So helping them kind of label that in themselves, right? What are some things that tell you this is about to happen? And it's a great starting point in having conversations around what we can do with that emotion. What are some healthy ways that we can manage that? Some coping. One great activity that you can do to facilitate conversations around that, I like to use a T-chart. Because a lot of our students are visual. I too am a visual learner. So I like to make a T-chart. You separate it out into 3 columns. Because if we want to ask our students healthy ways to navigate the feelings that they're feeling, sometimes they need some help starting those conversations. So helping them identify some safe alternatives to maybe whatever that behavior was that maybe isn't as healthy. So on your T-chart, you have 3 columns. In one column, you say, what are the activities? These are those self-soothing strategies. These are those things that students can do on their own. You want to make sure that they're healthy, they're safe, that the student enjoys doing them. You can do it as a large group, or you can have each student make one for themselves, because every student might identify different things. You will get things like watching TV, gaming, social media. You will get things like that on there, and that's okay. Just make sure you include some conversations in there about healthy limits and setting those boundaries around that. But you might also have them explore, okay, what are some things that you might be able to do when you're in math class? What are some things that you can do when you're at home? So our list might look differently depending on our setting, and that's okay too. The next column is, what are the programs? These would be your extracurricular clubs, community resources. It could be a faith community. It could be a class even, right? Are you excited about yearbook, Avid? Are you involved on a sports team, an after school club, a GSA here at your campus? So these are those programs, right? We have our activities that are sort of self-help things, and then we have our programs where they're kind of engaging in an activity with a group of friends or a group of like-minded individuals, peers. The last column is a huge resource. It's, who are the people? Who are those trusted adults that when you feel a certain way, when something big is happening, you can trust to go to have conversations? It could be counselors, teachers, family members, friends, fill in the blank. The goal of this is that you don't want them to just list their friends. You do want to make sure they're at least identifying one trusted adult on that list. A central theme of the WHO program is identifying someone that we can tell, someone that we can go to when we need help. That's what this list is for. So giving your students that visual And you could even have them do it on a little note card that they could carry around with them. I know sometimes it's helpful for students to have that to remind them of all these great things that they can use to navigate some of those big feelings. So some of the activities that we give you, in addition to that great freebie that you can do with your students, we do give you some follow-up activities that can support in conversations around trauma. We give you one where it's called Find the Signs. So it can help you further discussions around what trauma is and what it may look like and feel like. And so your students will be able to really navigate that and explore what trauma is.